This is going to involve hard work, of course, and it's going to mean working together. It'll mean accountability, something the people of the 7th District have been missing from their congressional representation. It'll mean sending someone to Washington, D.C. who has the patience, communication skills, core values, and disposition to combat a do-nothing Congress and to surprise people with a willingness to tackle difficult problems, no matter who was originally responsible for them. It will mean confronting our economic and educational problems with common sense and finding ways to keep our promises to those we value so dearly, such as vets and seniors. It'll mean avoiding the pitfalls of the Beltway syndrome and staying grounded in the district. It'll mean working diligently to help the federal government balance its checkbook and working across party lines. None of this will be easy, of course, but you're here today in part because you believe, like me, that something needs done. I hope you also believe, like me, that we can actually do something about the malaise of underrepresentation that this district has suffered from. I believe I personally can do something about it, and I humbly ask for your vote November 4th so we can make the journey together.
Mr. Brat.
Hi, I'm Dave Brat, running for Congress in the 7th. I'd like to thank, obviously, Benedictine and the Chamber for hosting us this evening. It's great to be with you. Some of you know I've spent most of my life putting economics and ethics together. I served 2 Virginia governors on their board of economists. I served as the president of the Virginia Association of Economists, and I've kind of put those 2 worlds together. I earned a master's in divinity degree from Princeton Theological Seminary and then a PhD in economics. And so I'm running for Congress because I want to take that skill set up to Washington and fix the economic problems we have in this country right now, and they are serious, and I'm sure we'll get into those tonight. And I also want to restore trust and confidence in basic American values and institutions. As we've knocked thousands of doors across the 9 counties in the city, 2 issues have come up more than any other. One is the disaster called Obamacare. It is crushing job creation and small business across all 9 counties in the city. That's the refrain we hear over and over and over. And after the election, you'll find out that the administration and their policies, 250,000 Virginians will lose their health insurance policies. On top of that, you have a $1.7 trillion regulatory burden placed on all businesses, and anyone here in any main street across all those counties knows what that means in their own particular businesses. On top of that, we have disaster at our border with illegal immigration. We have ISIS looking for a way, and national security agencies reporting that they're looking for a way to come into the country, and we have an Ebola outbreak and a crisis that's not being managed. On top of that, the economic numbers, $17 trillion in debt and $127 trillion in unfunded liabilities, have to be solved. We need an economist up in Washington, D.C. I'd be honored to have your vote on November 4th. Thank you very much for your consideration.
And Mr. Carr.
Well, good evening, and I want to reiterate the thanks for hosting this event at the Chamber. And instead of focusing on specific issues, I want to talk to you about the opportunity that we have in the 7th District right now. Now, it was referenced earlier, we've seen some very interesting things happen with this election so far. But that's not the end. Because we've seen changes throughout the country over the last 150 years that the same 2 political parties have traded who has what position, who's in control of which house. We've continued the decline of our country. We can see the federal government grow and intrude further into our personal lives. Now, this has happened under both of their watches. So what I'm doing is I'm offering you an opportunity to send a real message to Washington. A message that says we're no longer going to just accept this artificial bipolar choice that we've been given for so long. That we're not going to let fear rule our vote. Because that's what you get. A lot of people, as I've been talking to voters in the district, say, well, I'm very libertarian, but if I vote for you, then the Republican's going to win or the Democrat's going to win. And I've seen that from both sides. So what does that tell you? We identify with individuals who align with either side of that artificial divide. They're just scared to make a statement. This is the year for us to send a true statement to Washington that says the people will take control of the government back and send someone who wants to limit it on the fiscal side and on the social control side. Put the power back in the hands of the people.
All right, we will now direct questions to the candidates, and the order first will be Mr. Brat, then Mr. Carr, and then Mr. Trammell, and then we'll rotate first position. So the first question is, would you favor a repeal of the Affordable Health Care Act? And if so, what would you replace it with?
Right, yes, thank you for the question. I would absolutely be in favor of repealing Obamacare for many of the reasons we've just discussed. 250,000 Virginians will lose their health insurance policies in the month of November alone. Obamacare made several promises. It would lower the cost curve. It would solve the emergency room problem. It would lower healthcare costs for you. You would be able to keep your doctor-patient relationship intact. You would be able to keep your insurance policy intact. All of those promises, in fact, have turned out to be false. That on top of every business across the Commonwealth that we've talked to, everyone knows the effects of Obamacare on their businesses. Businesses aren't hiring. If they do hire, the 30-hour work week is in play for those hires. And so Obamacare is crushing small business. And this is the basic fundamental choice in this election. And as President Obama has said himself, my policies will be on the ballot in this election. And if you vote for my opponent on that side of the ledger, those policies will stay in place. And so that is the debate we face. If we want to get this economy moving, we do not want to start with top-down, federal-controlled mandate programs that were likely unconstitutional to begin with and go down that road. We want to put in place and replace Obamacare with free market solutions, and we know plenty of those are in place, allowing insurance policies to be sold across state lines, health savings accounts, the list goes on and on and on. All of these will lower costs, and that's what the history of free market economics teaches us. And so as an economist, I want to go up to Washington, D.C. and solve these economic problems and get our economic engine going so we are not under this 1% ongoing economic growth that we're all suffering under for the last 6 years. Thank you.
Mr. Carr, same question. Would you favor a repeal of the Affordable Health Care Act? And if so, what would you replace it with?
Well, favor of repeal. Yes, absolutely. Vote 50 times on the exact same issue? Absolutely not. And again, we've watched this bipolar approach to politics where if someone loses, they can't sit down and say, okay, we are at a point now that it's different than I wish we were. How do we make it better? Now, I was very vocal. I've been working in healthcare finance and analytics for the last almost 8 years now. When ACA first came out, the first thing that we did was look at the impact from the business side. And we knew providers would start closing doors. We knew that this would put a burden on physicians to the point that a lot of the physician experience that we have out there is disappearing because they're deciding to retire early. They cannot function under the mandates of the system. So, I too support a free market solution, but I realize that there may not be enough to push it through. I hope there is. I'm definitely going to fight for it. But if not, I'm going to sit down with both parties and talk about how can we fix certain pieces of the bill, the individual mandates, which I think are absolutely ridiculous. The government should not be mandating that you buy anything. I like the cross-state line fix, getting rid of the 45 Karen Ferguson, I believe. Let's start talking about a solution that both parties can get behind, not just further stagnating the process.
And And Mr. Trammell, same question. Would you favor a repeal of the Affordable Health Care Act? If so, what would you replace it with?
I would not favor repeal, and fortunately, we can't turn the time backwards and go back in time, because ACA has done some amazing things. Healthcare inflation is the lowest it's been in the last 50 years. We're saving hospitals this year $5.7 billion in billing. We are actually saving the federal budget $1 trillion over the next coming years. It's saving Dave $1,000. It's saving me $1,000. It's saving every person in this room $1,000 from the cost we were absorbing. The cost we were absorbing for the uninsured to go to the emergency room, and we're getting health care that was essentially not being paid for. We can't turn the hands of time back. We have to work with what we have. The ACA does have problems, and we need to fix those, and small businesses were already mentioned, and that's one of the problems that I would fix immediately.
The order for the next question will be Mr. Carr, Mr. Trammell, and Mr. Brat. There has been a lot of talk about reducing the federal deficit. This relates to the revenue side of that problem. Are there any programs that you would support that you believe would decrease the federal deficit by increasing federal revenues? Mr. Carr.
I want to make it very clear, I do not support any program that increases federal revenues. The federal government is taking enough from us as it is. I've heard a lot of people say, well, let's just bump the revenue up and we'll pay off our bills. What does the federal government do every time it gets more money? It finds something new to spend it on. Why would we be obtuse enough to believe that by simply increasing the revenues this time they're going to get it right? No, we have to look at intelligent cuts and not protecting crony capitalism. We're going to protect this industry because, well, we've got friends, or these are the guys that donate to campaigns enough. Everything is on the board. We need to review every department of the federal government. And, I've got a great document that tells us which pieces of that federal government should actually be there and which ones should not. We need to get back to that. We can do it. But we can't do it when we have two parties up there that refuse to actually have an open discussion or that want to protect their own special interests. So, yes, I absolutely would not favor increasing revenues. I'm going to focus on actually decreasing revenues, but decreasing the spending more.
Mr. Trammell, are there any programs that you would support that would decrease the federal deficit by increasing federal revenues?
There are none that I'm aware of as I think about it. And like individuals, we all have to balance our own checkbook. We all have to pay down our credit card debt when we have that. It's about time we held the federal government accountable in this way, and that's not an R or a D issue. That's just a way we have to live issue. I think there are ways we can save a lot of money in the federal government, and at some point tonight, I can tell you what my plan is for education or what my plan is for the VA. And those plans would enhance services, return some autonomy to states as well, and cut costs at the federal level and help us balance the budget. At the same time, the services that students and vets get would be improved, and I'll talk more about that, but I don't think we need to be talking about trying to increase revenues by expanding programs or adding new taxes. I think we need to work within our means.
And Mr. Brat, are there any programs that you would support that would decrease the federal deficit by increasing federal revenues?
The answer to that is let's follow the Republican creed and its plank that allows us to adhere to the free market system, which has brought us the greatest economy that the world has ever seen. And so in asking the question, what can you cut in order to enhance revenue growth? The history of the world is the history of dictators and pharaohs and tyrants and despots that have run the government from central command. And all of human history made $500 a year per capita, and that's in today's terms. And so what would I propose? I propose getting rid of all of those prior regimes and putting in place what we put in place in 1776, and that's the free market system. And if you get rid of those overarching federal programs that control people and allow people to follow their own best interests and their own pursuits and their own passions, that's the best government policy that you can have that will generate revenues with the same tax rates. So I'm not in favor of raising tax rates, obviously. I'm in favor of unleashing the economy, and that's precisely what will generate more revenues for the programs that we do have to put in place. And I agree with this document called the United States Constitution. There's 18 enumerated powers that very clearly delineate the role of the federal government. The 10th Amendment in that Constitution says all remaining powers, according to our founders, remain to the states and to the people. Now, if we want to get more specific, Tom Coburn is a great congressman who over the years has put together all sorts of cuts for silly programs, and he's been featured on 60 Minutes, et cetera, over the years. There's plenty of programs I would cut. Number one would be Obamacare. But the problem isn't coming up with a list of programs to cut. That list is very good, and Paul Ryan's budget also has a lot of programs that would be cut. The problem is achieving the political will to actually cut those programs. Too often those lists stay up on the counter and aren't put into action in D.C., and that's what we have to do.
The order for the next question will be Mr. Trammell, Mr. Brat, Mr. Carr. Mr. Trammell, shifting to the expense side of the equation, federal spending is heavily concentrated in Social Security, Medicare, and defense. Which, if any of these programs, do you consider untouchable as a means of reducing the federal deficit?
I consider Social Security to be a promise that we have to keep. I have ran on this platform my entire campaign. Social Security has been around for almost 80 years. We have at least 20 years of life left in it. We need to get together in a room and talk about how to make it last for even longer than that. And that is the problem in Washington. I will piggyback on what Dave said and say we lack the political will to sit down together across party lines and talk about how we can make things work better, including put more longevity into Social Security for the long run. In terms of the military, I would like to say that we seem to have this habit of going to Iraq. It looks like we're almost ready to go again. And every time we go, we spend trillions that are not in the budget. And I believe we need a strong military, but I also believe we need to stop going into Iraq and spending trillions of dollars and never solving anything. And so there are many things we can do to be more fiscally responsible that involve political will and difficult decision making.
Mr. Brat, same question. Federal spending is heavily concentrated in Social Security, Medicare, and defense. Which, if any of these programs, do you consider untouchable as a means of reducing the federal deficit?
Yeah, well, as an economist, that is exactly the right question. And the four entitlement programs at the bottom of the debt clock, Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, and the Bush prescription drug plan add up to $127 trillion in unfunded liabilities. That's not the cost of those programs. That's the part in law that's off budget. It's non-discretionary spending. You have to change the law in order to change those programs. From early on when I ran back in the primary, and as reported in the Richmond Times-Dispatch and other media as well, I too have made the pledge not to reduce benefits to current seniors in any of those systems. The difference, however, between what my opponent just said and what I am doing is that he says we should all be nice and get in a room and make some hard decisions. Well, if you get in that room, you have to trust the other side, right? We're going to have to get together with people of goodwill, and we're going to have to make some hard decisions on how to reform those systems so that they are in place for the next generation. At present, those four programs together will be bankrupt by 2033. Another way of saying the same thing, those four programs at the bottom of the debt clock will take up the entire United States budget revenues by 2030. So these are not political talking points, those are facts. Now, the difference comes, Jack sounds nice, says, let's get in a room, work together. But at the same time he says, let's be nice, he's running negative ads claiming that I want to cut seniors' programs. And he knows that to be a falsehood. And that's been reported as a falsehood everywhere along the line. And so,
again, let the candidates speak for themselves.
right. So like Jack, I'll give a similar answer to Jack. We'll get in a room and make the hard choices in a bipartisan fashion. I have proposed increasing the retirement age on those programs. Can I have a few more minutes because of the delay, or a few more seconds so I can finish my answer?
10 seconds.
Yeah, and I'll just wrap it up on that. And so it is crucial that we work together, but we cannot be attacking each other through negative political ads at the same time that you want to move forward and work together on a bipartisan fashion. And so I have practical solutions in place, and I do want to work in a bipartisan manner on them. Thank you.
Mr. Carr, same question. Federal spending concentrated in Social Security, Medicare, and Defense. Which of any of these programs do you consider untouchable as a means of reducing the federal deficit?
Well, this is one of the areas where a core point actually resonates across all three of our responses. That the seniors who are currently on Medicare, Social Security, they've been paying into the system. And the phrase entitlement a lot of times has this negative connotation, but what it means is you are entitled to that. You are entitled to that because you have paid into that. What we need to do, and when we talk about the unfunded liabilities, I've seen the way those numbers are built up, and they're making a lot of assumptions that I think we could call into question, but it's still significant. I believe we actually need to get the federal government out of the investment business, out of forcing you into a specific plan for retirement. I know that, well, Texas did this many years ago, allowed people to opt out. Said, you're not going to get Social Security, but you can opt out of this. It's a nice little loophole, making $9 to the one of the people that stayed on Social Security because they took charge of their own investment. They have a lot more skin in the game. So, untouchable, none of those are untouchable. Do we keep those programs as they are now? Absolutely not.
Order for the next question, Mr. Brat, Mr. Carr, Mr. Trammell. Most Americans view securing our borders as a high priority. What is your view as to the biggest threats we currently face in this regard, and how would you propose we deal with those threats?
Yes, thank you very much. Back in the primary, I ran on this issue 10 months ago, and for 30 years we've been promised a secure border, and for 30 years that promise has not been fulfilled. And so 10 months ago, we saw crony capitalism at its finest, with the chamber and big business pursuing cheap wages by encouraging 10 million illegal immigrants to come across the border through administrative policy and compete against Americans for jobs after a financial crisis when our labor markets are still broken. 40% of college graduates can't find jobs here. We're not skilling up our own kids well enough. We're at the bottom of the industrialized world in math and science test scores. And so the cheap Band-Aid approach, the cheap easy fix, is immigration policy. But that's not a fix. That does not fix our economy. We need to skill up our own people and make them competitive on an international basis. And that's a solution that we can all work on a bipartisan basis. I think everyone would be in agreement with that. Since then, ISIS has emerged as a national security threat. And we need to secure the border on that front. Also, since the primary, 50 to 100,000 orphans are coming from El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras over the border as orphans, and has created what the White House, by its own admission, calls a humanitarian crisis. I opposed all of those policies. It's not compassionate at all to the kids. I worked at the World Bank for several years. I did my PhD on cross-country economic growth. The true compassionate answer to help the folks from around the world is to implement what we did to our arch enemies after World War II. Free markets, constitutions, economics, free markets, and the rule of law. I want to help hundreds of millions of people all over the world so that they can flourish as well as we do. That's why they want to come here, to enjoy the promise of America. I want them to share in that same dream.
Mr. Carr, same question. Most Americans view securing our borders as a high priority. What is your view as to the biggest threats we currently face in this regard, and how would you propose we deal with those threats?
Well, so there's this thing that I don't know if anybody's heard of called a free market.
I like it.
Yeah. Well, the fact is, I believe in free markets, but unfortunately, my opponent doesn't understand that the labor market is part of the market. He just said, oh, we need to control the market. We need to control how many people are here to work. That's not a free market approach. If you're going to apply a principle, please apply it across the entire spectrum. Now, for me, yes, we have an issue with the borders. We have a bigger issue with our immigration approach. There's nothing, I like to go back to this document probably a little bit too frequently for some people. There's nothing in here that says we can limit immigration. Now, what does that mean for our markets? What does that actually mean when we have more people coming in? Well, if we know they're here, I agree we have to make sure we understand who is here. And if they're coming here to work, they're coming here for school, they're coming here to visit family, I am fine with that, as long as we know they're here. And that means, fine, let's lock down the border. As soon as you make it where somebody comes in, says, this is who I am, and they're allowed to come over, we can lock the border down, because the people that are coming here and don't want us to know that they're here are doing it for some probably less than ideal reason. Our fix is not to put up a barbed wire fence and distort our economy by distorting the labor market. As a matter of fact, if we get rid, we've never heard a solution to the people that are here. That question's been asked many times, and it gets avoided every time. I'm going to say we need to let the people that are here continue contributing to the economy. Yes. As long as we know they're here, get them in.
And Mr. Trammell, same question. Most Americans view securing our borders as high priority. What is your view as to the biggest threats we currently face in this regard, and how would you propose we deal with those threats?
Well, first of all, we don't need a wall. We've seen how that worked over in East Germany. What we do need is to enforce rules that we make. And this means that we should have a border policy that we enforce. We shouldn't make rules that we don't intend to enforce. But that border policy and that border security needs to be part of a comprehensive immigration reform. And talking about security threats, and as it relates to the border, there's a danger of masking the real failure that this Congress has not done anything about this situation. So I do think that we face threats without, and we need to have border security, but it has to be part of a comprehensive immigration reform that has all of the other moving pieces included, and we shouldn't make rules that we're not going to enforce in terms of border policy.
The order for this question will be Mr. Carr, Mr. Trammell, Mr. Brat. What effect do you believe background checks have on gun-related violence?
Background checks on gun-related violence? Well, we have background checks now, and we have gun-related violence. The issue is not instituting more background checks. The issue is actually enforcing the laws that we have now. Where do most of the illegal guns come from? Actually, there's one operation that our own government put in place recently that put more guns into the hands of criminals than anything I've ever seen proven. Everybody's heard of Fast and Furious, right? Or did that get swept under the rug too quickly? Right? The idea of our own, Bureau of Firearms Control is going to just say, well, we're going to sell these guns across the line. Give them to the Mexican cartels. This is fact. This actually happened. So what we have is they're creating this situation that says, look, all these illegal guns are out here. Look at the gun violence. As they're shoving guns out to criminals. Do you want to trust that same government? Are we going to expand their control? No. I don't believe that the background checks, as they're currently enforced, are having any material impact.
Mr. Trammell, same question. What effect do you believe background checks have on gun-related violence?
I think background checks play an appropriate role in the way that we manage our Second Amendment rights. I am a gun owner, and I strongly support Second Amendment rights. And I think, again, this question masks a larger underlying issue, which is our mental health epidemic. And when I go to Congress, I will address gun violence through mental health initiative, because I think that is part of the underlying issue.
And Mr. Brat, same question. What effect do you believe background checks have on gun-related violence?
Yeah, well, I would differ with the last response. I don't think it's the federal government's job to manage rights. I think rights are endowed by our Creator, and it's the role of the federal government to protect those rights for us. And so I have a different view of managing rights. But when it comes to background checks, I think most of the incidences we all have in mind lately have resulted from people with mental disabilities. And so background checks there are appropriate. And if I think no one wants to have guns in the hands of folks who are a danger to themselves and to others. And so we have 20,000 gun laws on the books right now. I don't think it's a matter that additional laws are going to solve every problem that can come up in our history together, but the background checks are already in place. Paying attention to the mental health issues is important, and that's where I would place the priority when I go up to Washington if I'm lucky enough to be elected November 4.
Order for this question will be Mr. Trammell, Mr. Brat, Mr. Carr. Mr. Trammell, what do you believe is the most effective way to improve our current education system?
Defederalize education. And what I mean by that is we have taken away autonomy from local schools and school systems through this accountability movement. Most people don't realize the history of this. It began back in 1989 on campus at UVA, where they had a meeting of the Educational Brain Trust. And what that resulted in is now several decades of a growing testing movement, which is testing our children to death and putting our schools under such tremendous stress that school systems cheat on their test scores rather than risk losing funding. How did we get to this point? Well, we got to this point in part because educational decision-making drained away from local school systems. It even drained away from state agencies, and now it's centered in Washington, D.C., and many educational experts believe that we're not going to fix education until we return some of that decision-making power to locales and states. And so there are many problems to fix in education, ranging from special education to pre-K initiatives to help reading. We know we need to emphasize STEM. We need to catch up with our competitors around the world. But we can begin in large part by addressing the failings of the accountability movement.
Mr. Brat, same question. What do you believe is the most effective way to improve our current education system?
Right. I believe, I agree with Jack that the central thing we need to do is bring education back to the pupil-teacher relationship, and to bring the money from the federal government back down to the state and then to the local level to do this. Unfortunately for Jack, President Obama has said my policies will be on the ballot, and they are. And his party is the party of central government solutions for everything. No Child Left Behind, and Common Core underneath this president are with us. And so Jack may oppose those, but I worked for years.
Again, please, and add to his time, please refrain from editorial comments from the crowd. It's only fair to let the candidates speak for themselves.
Right, and so I was saying I worked in the General Assembly for years on education issues, crafting education policies, both for kids with disabilities for 3 years, and when the vote came up, it was party line to offer kids a chance, a voucher, using state funds so they could opt out of their IEP and the one-size-fits-all bureaucracy. And guess which party blocked disability kids from moving forward and being given some choice? The other side of the aisle, the Democrat side. And so Jack may be in favor of that personally, but he will be bucking his entire party and the entire philosophy of the Democrat Party. And it doesn't just rest there. Obamacare is the exact same thing, right? We want to get rid of the federal power and bring it down to the state and local level where there are solutions. What happened with health care? We've severed the relationship between the patient and their doctor. Just as with education, we've severed the relationship between the teacher and the pupil. And so there is a very big difference in philosophy at stake here, and your vote will matter greatly. Someone can say they're against all this testing. We all know it's a disaster, but you better vote for the party that believes in individual initiative at the local level, and that's the Republican Party. And so I would ask for your vote.
And Mr. Carr, same question. What do you believe is the most effective way to improve our current education system?
Well, everybody's looking at here. Okay, you're a guy from industry, and we've got two professors up here. What do you know about education? And what I'm going to say is I agree with what both of them said, that we need to get the federal government out of education. I mean, the Department of Education at the federal level should not exist. So that's a nice, easy answer, but I want to take this opportunity real quick to say, we can disagree without being disagreeable. And to the woman who has several times interrupted Mr. Brat, I want to say, it's okay to disagree with him, but let's have the courtesy up here of letting all of us finish, and outside, I'm sure that all of us would be willing to entertain those remarks.
This is a forum for the candidates, not for the audience, okay? Thank you.
So, a quote. It's actually one of my favorite. Aristotle said, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." Let's keep an open mind.
The order for this next question will be Mr. Brat, Mr. Carr, and Mr. Trammell. Some view the National Security Agency's collection of individual telephone records to be a necessary action in the fight against terrorism. Others would argue that such actions are an unacceptable infringement of individual rights. What is your position?
My position is that is an incredibly tough tension to navigate, but the United States of America has done it and will continue to do it. When it comes to the collection of data, I do not believe in these bulk data collection processes under the Patriot Act, and I would oppose them. And so the way to handle that is to follow the Constitution, and if you want to get information on an individual that is a national security threat, you ask the judge for an individual warrant under law for cause. You don't get to gather bulk information on groups of people where there's no suspicion and no reasonable cause to pursue that avenue. And so this is a nation under laws, and we have to stay that way. Even if that makes it hard, if it makes it harder on our national security team to do their job, we have to maintain the rule of law. That's why we're the envy of the world, is because we have protected that our entire history. So we can protect individual liberty and individual rights thoroughly, And you will find no one more aggressive in pursuing our national security and working with our military leaders in the field and supporting them at every stage of their careers as well. They both can be done at the same time. There is a significant tension, but that's how I would navigate the issue.
And Mr. Carr, same question. Some view the National Security Agency's collection of individual telephone records to be a necessary action in the fight against terrorism. Others would argue that such actions are an unacceptable infringement of individual rights. What is your position?
It is absolutely unacceptable, without a doubt. As a matter of fact, I have signed a pledge to get rid of the NSA and combine the 18 different security agencies that we have at the federal government level. There is so much waste going on at that level, and it is not necessary to be able to defend our country. We've been defending our country for years. Yes, the world changes, but what integrity do we have as a country if we allow fear to take away our individual liberties? So no, I do not believe it's necessary to protect us. I believe there, as was said, we have processes in place that allow you to abide by the Constitution and get the data that is necessary to keep us safe.
Mr. Trammell, it's a long question. If you'd like me to repeat it, I will. All right. Some view the National Security Agency's collection of individual telephone records to be a necessary action in the fight against terrorism. Others would argue that such actions are an unacceptable infringement of individual rights. What is your position?
I think I would argue that they are an unacceptable infringement on individual rights because you use the word individual. Therefore, I am not making reference to the group data collection that my colleague was referring to. And the libertarian streak in me is very skeptical of any program that spies on its own people. I just don't think that's consistent with who we are and what we've stood for. And so I agree with elements of what both my colleagues have said, that we shouldn't be spying on our own people.
The order will be now Mr. Carr, Mr. Trammell, and Mr. Brat. Many candidates tout their intent and ability to act in an independent fashion. Most, however, seem to run into a congressional hierarchy that requires adherence to party lines in return for support of personal platforms. How would you avoid this? And if you were successful, would you be concerned about losing your ability to introduce and influence legislation?
Does anybody in here think that either of the main parties are going to give me anything easily? Yeah, I don't either. This is kind of a give me. I'm not going up there with any delusions that I'm going to get special concessions from one side or the other. You have to realize that both sides, their primary interest right now is keeping the two-party system intact so they can present to you the WWF match that goes on in D.C. every day. They want power. Both sides want power for a different reason, but make no mistake, they are going to do what it takes to keep power at those very centralized levels. Arguably, there are about a dozen people who run the federal government. I will probably never get to talk to them. But I'll get to talk to the workers on the floor. I'll get to go up there and be the voice for the 7th District that says, yeah, we're not falling for it anymore. You know, that body slam was fake and we know it. So let's start working together. Let's put somebody up there who isn't going to be beholden to either side of this aisle. And while we will undoubtedly hear that neither of my opponents have any intention or any ability to side with the party lines, they already are. I'm the only one up here that is not beholden to either of the broken parties.
Mr. Trammell, same question. Many candidates tout their intent and ability to act in an independent fashion. Most, however, seem to run into a congressional hierarchy that requires adherence to party lines in return for support of personal platforms. Would you avoid this, and if you are successful, would you be concerned about losing your ability to introduce and influence legislation?
I would certainly avoid the pitfalls of partisanship. As a historian, I was a history teacher before I became a special education teacher. I've looked at data examining partisanship, and it's grown worse and worse over time. And the 2012 Congress was historically the worst in 200 years. What that creates in a two-party system is a hole in the middle, and it hurts both Republicans and Democrats. It hurts Americans in general. And so I'm not running on the president's platform. I'm not running on a Democratic platform. I am a Democrat, and I'm proud to be a Democrat. But you'll notice my signs say Jack Trammell, Congress. They don't say Jack Trammell, Democrat for Congress. And the reason why is because even though I'm proud to be a Democrat and associate with their core values, I also realize that I have to be able to work with a much wider world of ideas and people. I voted across the line before. I voted for Republicans before. I vote for the person. I vote for the idea. I vote for the improvement. And that's what we need to bring that back to the middle where both parties are better.
Mr. Brat, same question. Many candidates tout their intent and ability to act in an independent fashion. Most, however, seem to run into a congressional hierarchy that requires adherence to party lines in return for support of personal platforms. Would you seek to avoid this, and if you are successful, would you be concerned about losing your ability to introduce and influence legislation?
I would do more than seek to avoid it. I already have avoided it. I ran in a primary on principles against an opponent who I did not think shared my same principles. And so while James Carr, I enjoyed the humor in his remarks, it was very good. But what both of my opponents are missing is the track record and a litany of issues. They both say I'm not beholden, et cetera. I have more than that. I have a track record. I've taught ethics for the past 19 years. Ethics is when you put the rules down on paper ahead of time so that everybody knows if you're cheating or not. Right? A football game without the referees and without a rule book would be chaos. I have put those down. Go to my opponent's websites and see if you can find comparable principles on paper ahead of time as to what I ran on. I ran on the Republican Creed, which are 6 principles, and I don't have time to go over those in 2 minutes, but they're all listed there on my website. I challenged a primary opponent in my own party because I thought I could better represent those principles. I will go forward and I will pursue those principles in Congress. If you elect me to that office, it would be the honor of my life. But that is fully what I intend to do. And so those principles, if I do have time, the lights aren't going off yet, are adherence to the free market system, equal treatment under law for everyone, fiscal responsibility, adherence to the Constitution, peace is best preserved through a strong national defense, and faith in God, as recognized by our founders, is absolutely essential to a strong moral fiber. I also made several pledges. I pledged to put in a fair or a flat tax. I opposed the Export-Import Bank. That is opposition to my own party at present. I am not worried about personalities or leaders. I will follow principles as I have in the past, and you can count on me to do it in the future. Thank you.
The order for this question, Mr. Trammell, Mr. Brat, Mr. Carr. Gerrymandering is a practice that attempts to establish a political advantage for a particular party by manipulating district boundaries to create partisan advantage districts. It's been argued that due to gerrymandering today, parties choose their constituents, not the other way around. How do you feel about this practice, and would you recommend any changes to the process?
Well, I absolutely would recommend changes to the process, and I think the practice of gerrymandering is exactly why those charts I was referring to have moved increasingly out away from the middle. That's why in a state like Virginia, we see an imbalance in the number of Republicans and Democrats in Congress based on the way the state votes at large. This is primary evidence of gerrymandering. And I think when we talk about term limits, the original term limits were the ballot box. The reason we need term limits, if people are going to talk about that, and I don't happen to think that we need term limits necessarily, is because of gerrymandering. Now, gerrymandering is solved at the state level, but I think we also lead at the federal level with the way we work with each other.
And Mr. Brat, same question to you. I won't repeat what gerrymandering is, but I will again say that it has been argued that due to gerrymandering, parties choose their constituents, not the other way around. How do you feel about this practice, and would you recommend any changes to the process?
Yeah, I think we all know when we look at the maps and see them squiggling throughout the state in odd shapes that something is going wrong and there's politics at play. And as I said, I've run on principles, and so there are some clear solutions. One clear solution is to have that process take place as transparently as possible, right? So if you have those decisions being made behind closed doors, then politics can be at play. And so like every issue, we are sent to Washington to represent the people. That is the job description. I have run on term limits from 10 months ago. In the primary, I term limited myself to 12 years. And so it's one thing to say I'm going to do the right thing. It's another thing to have evidence on your side that you have already made some hard calls and taken real opposition against someone in place. And so I think I have a proven track record of acting in principle going forward. And transparency would probably be the number one principle that will help to solve that. We have high-end university students across the Commonwealth that have been employed to come up with more rational, more fair districts. And some people have said they've done an excellent job. And so I would want to use that in our process as a blueprint. You can also have rational models that just have a computer design them as a starting reference point. And so there are several solutions at play, and if we put that whole process out in front of the public, the folks we hope to represent, I think that's a start to fixing the problem.
And Mr. Carr, it's been argued that due to gerrymandering, parties choose their constituents, not the other way around. How do you feel about the practice, and would you recommend any changes to the process?
It's really hard for me not to laugh at that question because I haven't seen the Libertarian district yet. But what's really interesting is as you go around the district, you find more Libertarians in the district than either of the other two parties. They just don't know it yet. They say, oh, I'd vote for you. I agree with you on principle much more. The thing is, you'll never win. You get the wasted vote argument. We can talk about that later. But yes, it's a significant issue. There's a reason why the 7th District has voted for the same party as long as it has, and has had such a wide swing that direction. And it's not because of the track record of the party or of the individual that was representing us. It's because the lines were drawn in such a way to make sure somebody could stay in line. Now, we're actually, unfortunately, I'm not sure that, well, hopefully I will be representing you or running for office again in 2 years because, well, we know how bad our districts are. As a matter of fact, we just had a directive come down that we're going to change them. And I think changing the 3rd district, well, the 7th district has to be part of that. I believe in transparency. I believe that is the solution. At a federal level, it's really hard to mandate that because it is something enacted at the state. But I would like to see a very transparent process in place. And I think what you'll find is the two controlling parties are probably not going to want to see that happen because you will find several Libertarians getting elected when you don't have a district that sways one direction or the other.
The order for this will be Mr. Brat, Mr. Carr, Mr. Trammell. What do you see as the impact of increasing the minimum wage?
The impact of increasing the minimum wage is best seen where they've done it. In Seattle, they recently raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour. You're going to end up with a $15 hamburger. What's the immediate impact? Businesses try to stay in business, and so they need to sell hamburgers to stay in business. If you raise the minimum wage to a point that they cannot hire more people, then some people will get the higher minimum wage, but other people will not be hired. And that's the hard part of economics, is to see the unseen, to see the people that were not hired. Our labor force participation rate in the United States right now is at its all-time lows since the end of World War II. The labor market is the fundamental piece of the economy that the top experts in the country cannot solve. I know the head of BLS. I've worked with him over the years. He's been to several of our functions downtown. Bureau of Labor Statistics, they cannot solve that problem. But the one thing economists know is that the minimum wage is not the solution. Let me put this even more clearly. The history of nations, we made $500 a year for all of human history, right? Every single person, that up until 1800. That was, again, pharaohs and kings and despots dictating the wage for their civilization. How did that work? It didn't work. When did modern economic growth happen? About 1800. For the first time in human history, Adam Smith comes along, economics starts, and you get explosive modern economic growth when the market system, right? The first plank of the Republican Creed, adherence to the free market system. That's the first time in world history we chose the free market system to set wage rates in accord with productivity. If you do that, you get the most successful nation on the face of the planet in history. And so you don't go with artificial wage rates made up by federal government who think they know best. You go with a free market system, and it's produced the results we have. Thank you.
Mr. Carr, what do you see as the impact of increasing the minimum wage?
Well, this is one of those great times where I get to say, yes, exactly. Anybody who has studied economics and finance understands the negative impacts of arbitrarily increasing a minimum wage. It is inevitable. Everything goes up. I could care less about the wage. I'd be fine with $2 an hour if you can go buy a car for $1,000. It's buying power that we should be concentrating on. All we do when we increase these wages artificially is increase the cost of everything else, and more importantly, we're dropping people out of the labor force. Now, almost everything that I've seen concentrates on the individuals at the minimum wage and the impact on them and how many jobs are lost and the impact of businesses based on the increase in that specific market. But we're talking, the proposals that I've seen, and, Jack, no offense, but I've heard you say before that I want somebody else to set the bar and I'm going to fight for something higher. Well, when you do that, you're jumping over a lot of experience in that industry. Now, do you think that the group that's making more than minimum wage now is just going to accept that they are worth the same amount as a newcomer that's coming in to learn the skills? Absolutely not. You're going to basically inflate the cost to the companies at much larger than any of the numbers that I've seen predicted. Or what you're going to see is people leaving those industries, businesses losing the most productive individuals and going elsewhere. So arbitrarily pushing a minimum wage is counter to the stated goal.
And Mr. Trammell, what do you see as the impact of increasing the minimum wage?
Well, nothing should be arbitrary, and nothing is black and white. And I have looked at some data that my colleagues are probably familiar with that shows that if you raise the minimum wage enough, you start to lose significant jobs. I've also looked at data that shows something that people won't talk about, which is that more modest raises to the minimum wage don't have a significant impact on the loss of jobs. So like many things in politics, it's a cost-benefit analysis, and we have to think about what are we trying to do by raising the minimum wage. What we're doing is we're acknowledging that the free market is not a no-rules market. What we're doing is we're saying the cost potentially is outweighed by the benefit of lifting people out of poverty, giving them access to a chance to get into a middle-class life, to get a better job, to possibly become a homeowner, to possibly be able to purchase the car that enables them to drive to the better job. It's a cost-benefit analysis, and I'm in favor of raising the minimum wage.
Order for this will be Mr. Carr, Mr. Trammell, Mr. Brat. The United States has one of the highest corporate tax rates in the developed world. Would you support lowering the corporate tax rate?
Well, the easy answer to that is yes. The issue is how many of the corporations here actually pay the tax rate that's on the books. Our entire tax system is broken because it's been created by a system of crony capitalism. The incentives that are built into our tax code benefit certain groups over others. And what we have in place now is a tax code that does not apply equally to everyone. What we need to do is rethink the entire approach to taxation. And it's not increase it for the people that make more because we're going to bring in more revenues. Why harm someone? Why penalize them for being more productive, for doing well? But it's not eliminate the tax because we do have a federal government that we have to support. I want to get as close as possible to eliminating the tax, but, we know there are going to be compromises from an ideal situation. So I support something similar to the fair tax, but I know that the true fair tax will never get passed. So we need a combination of the fair tax and a flat tax, and that will get rid of all of these loopholes. So corporations will be paying less in taxes, but you'll have none of them getting these loopholes. You're going to bring businesses back. So if an individual corporation is paying less, you have more corporations contributing to that pot, and the overall tax base for us to use is going to be more. You're also going to lessen the burden on the lower and middle classes. You have to rethink taxes in general. It's not simply reducing the corporate tax rate.
Mr. Trammell, same question. The United States has one of the highest corporate tax rates in the developed world. Would you support lowering the corporate tax rate?
It's a very interesting question for a Democrat to answer, actually. But I've been talking to corporations around this district, and what they're telling me is similar to what James said. There are exemptions and loopholes, and so there are some corporations who are playing by the rules, and they're actually paying much more than other corporations because they're playing by the rules. It didn't occur to me to know this when I started as a candidate, but I now know we haven't had serious corporate tax reform since 1986. That's before the internet. I mean, has the world changed since then? Has the way we do business changed since then? I think we need comprehensive corporate income tax reform, and I think we need to help there be equity amongst these competing companies and corporations in a way that makes sense and in a way that doesn't penalize people for playing by the rules.
And Mr. Brat, same question. The United States has one of the highest corporate tax rates in the developed world. Would you support lowering the corporate tax rate?
I absolutely have to support lowering the corporate tax rate, and unlike my Democratic opponent, it's not hard for me to give that answer. It's very easy to give that answer. And back when we had fundamental tax reform, the president that did that was Ronald Reagan, one of my heroes. And after he enacted that fundamental tax reform, we had tremendous economic growth that led the world and got the entire global economy moving again. And so it's exactly what we have to do. The current corporate tax rate is at 35, and all in with state add-ons, it gets up to 38, 39%. It's the highest nominal rate in the world. As a result of that high rate, we have between $1 and $2 trillion of corporate earnings or profits overseas, not coming back here. Can you imagine what $1 trillion to $2 trillion in business investment coming back to our borders would do for this economy? That's bigger than TARP. That's bigger than et cetera, right? Instead of doing TARP, we should have done a corporate tax reduction and seen the economy take off. It is difficult to enact that alone. If you tack just a corporate tax rate reduction, along with that, you do have to get rid of the tax deductions and loopholes that K Street and Wall Street take advantage of. And so the complexity there goes over to the individual pass-through small business owner, the S-Corps, right? The C-Corps would get the corporate rate reduction. The S-Corp profits pass through to the individual on their tax return. And so you're going to get rid of their tax deductions without lowering their rate. So it is a complex process, but it can be done, and it is being discussed right now up in D.C. You would have to harmonize those rates up between the corporate side and then the personal S-Corp pass-through. We have to do that. That will rejuvenate our economy and allow us to pay the bills for the tremendous debt we're laying on the next generation. Thank you.
Mr. Trammell, Mr. Brat, Mr. Carr will be our order for this question. Mr. Trammell, how do you feel about the increasing use of super PACs that are permitted to accept unlimited contributions and make unlimited expenditures for the purpose of influencing the election process?
I don't like it. We need campaign finance reform. The influence of big money in politics is legion. It's something that is making our two-party system dysfunctional. We need campaign finance reform. We need to reduce the ability of a large moneyed interest to outweigh the interests of hundreds of individual voters who feel a certain way or have a certain agenda.
Mr. Brat, same question. How do you feel about the increasing use of super PACs that are permitted to accept unlimited contributions and make unlimited expenditures for the purpose of influencing the election process? I
don't like them either, but I do like liberty. And that is the fundamental challenge when trying to solve that problem. Our democracy does hinge on the ability of individuals to come out and join the democratic process. And I don't think there's anyone that would deny the incredible amounts of money being spent in these super PACs sway voters this way and that way. But any solution cannot threaten individual liberty and the right of individuals to pursue free expression as they seek to pursue it. And so we've had Supreme Court cases recently that made that decision. And so it is very hard to do reform without infringing on individual liberty in the country. And so the best way to do that is what I think we're talking about up here tonight in various ways. Someone has to run on principle and take other candidates on head on who have more money. I did that. I did that in a primary. I ran on a shoestring budget. I ran against someone with a lot of money, and I won an election. And so it is doable if you put your principles out there in front on paper ahead of time. That's the ethical approach. We can win elections. Part of the fault is it's look in a mirror time for all of us, right, to get our culture back. If you don't like negative ads and the politicians that are engaging in negative ads, don't vote for them, right, whatever you do. Right? My opponent has some negative ads up running that are untruthful. If you don't like those ads, don't vote for that candidate. So the big money can be tied to influencing elections. I don't like it, but I do not want to intrude on individual liberty. That is the fundamental American virtue in that Constitution that we have to uphold at every point in time. Thank you.
And Mr. Carr, same question. How do you feel about the increasing use of super PACs that are permitted to accept unlimited contributions and make unlimited expenditures for the purpose of influencing the election process?
Well, I'm going to echo a little bit of what Mr. Brat said, that there's a free association and First Amendment issue that's been addressed in the courts. But when he talks about running on principle, I want to say that you and I have a distinctly different view of what a shoestring budget is. But I am, and I did early on, I'm not afraid of putting everything that I have, every issue out for everyone to see, to hold me accountable to. Matter of fact, between 1,500 and 2,500 words on any one of them on my website, and as somebody says, add this to your website, I go out there and I let them know what I think. Now, I have spent, I think I just submitted, but I'm my treasurer as well, so I know that, I submitted just over $5,600 expense through 1015. $5,600. I'm proving that you do not need, 220, I believe, through the primary and, well over $1 million at this point collected in total. That's not taking the money out of politics. We could take a different approach. It is personal responsibility. It's everyone out here right now. It's your responsibility to educate yourselves about the candidates, not to listen to ads on TV. Doesn't matter if they're negative or positive, but to go out and see where the candidate stands on the issues, to come to events like this, ask questions. I've been going to as many events as I can, and I'm glad that all three of us are finally on the stage to show a contest. When the voters get to see all three options, right, you get to educate yourselves. Now, some of you are definitely not going to vote for me, and I can kind of see with the applause where that's going to go. But I want everybody to, at the very least, go look all three of us up.
Gentlemen, we have time for one more question, so we will do that in the order of Mr. Brat, Mr. Carr, and Mr. Trammell, and then we will make closing statements. Actually, those will be done in the same order. So Mr. Brat will make the first, and then Mr. Trammell, and then Mr. Carr. So I'll keep this straight. But Mr. Brat, do you believe that energy independence should be a high priority for the United States? And if so, what actions do you believe would make the most impact?
I do believe in energy independence in an interconnected world with the threat coming from the Middle East, the military threats we have, the more energy independence we have, obviously, the better. And on energy policy, I mean, the United States, we're sitting on two Saudi Arabias are underneath us right now in terms of liquefied natural gas. The problem is because our political system is broken, and one of the parties is for regulating everything under the sun so we can't take advantage of our natural resources. It's very hard to achieve energy independence. And so some people are against nuclear power. Some people are against coal because it's too dirty. Some people are against fracking for natural gas. If you're against those three, you're against 80% of our energy consumption and production in this country. And if you like the lights on here tonight and your iPads at home and your refrigerators and air conditioning, I think we need to pursue not only energy independence, but all across the board energy production to keep our costs low for our consumers and for you in this audience. And so we're making huge strides. We need to have leadership out of the executive branch with a coherent foreign policy and military strategy in the Middle East, which we do not have. If we had friends throughout the Middle East, instead of mass confusion and chaos right now, we could make some deals on energy that would be helpful to achieve peace across the world as well. Right now, we all know Ukraine has its thumb down on Germany for energy that Germany needs. We need to strategically think through not only our energy needs, but its relation to our national security concerns and our economic growth going forward. Thank you.
Mr. Carr, do you believe that energy independence should be a high priority for the United States? And if so, what actions do you believe would make the most impact?
I absolutely believe that energy independence is important. But I want everybody to listen to what was just said here, because there are a few people who have a misconception that Mr. Brat is in any way, shape, or form a libertarian. The statement that was just made, well, we need to have a good military approach to having energy from overseas. That does not equate to energy independence. We need to find out how to go inject ourselves into foreign affairs in order to have cheap energy here. That's not the solution. What I believe in is getting out of the way of innovation in the U.S. We have so many regulations that benefit certain industries over others. They're stymieing real innovation. We decide how many millions of dollars we throw. Everybody remembers Solyndra, right? We're going to invest. The government's going to take your money and throw it at a company that's going to waste it. This is not happening with just alternative methods. There are regulations that incentivize people not to grow corn on their fields because that can be used for alternative fuel source research. These are things that the gas and oil companies here want to avoid. I am for allowing the market to determine the best process forward. You know what? When the market is allowed to work without these regulatory biases in place, innovation takes place, and we need to apply that across the board. Again, free market consistency, not regulations in certain markets but not others. I want a consistency of principle.
And Mr. Trammell, do you believe that energy independence should be a high priority for the United States? And if so, what actions do you believe would make the most impact?
I do believe we should be headed straight down that road toward energy independence. And I believe the key element is going to be balance and shared responsibility. I'll give a quick example from my farm life. I have a creek that dumps directly into the Chesapeake Bay. I have farm animals who are doing things that get into the water. I won't go into details about that. And I had a friend that actually Dave and I both know who is quite an environmentalist, and he said, "Jack, you need a riparian buffer zone to protect your creek." And I said, "Okay, that sounds okay. I think I can afford to do that." I put a half-mile fence in, and I grew the kind of plants that stop erosion. This friend came out and he said, "No, this isn't going to work. You only did this 60 to 80 feet from the water. You need to do it 200 yards from the water." And I looked at him and I said, "Look, my farm's only 25 acres. I'll go out of business if I do what you're asking me to do." Well, the reason I tell this story is that we need balance. We need to be able to have an EPA that protects the environment, but not an EPA that stifles business or ignores the reality of where 80% of our energy comes from right now. We need balance, we need shared responsibility, and then we can head down that road to energy independence.
And that brings us to the end of our questions. So I will now ask each candidate to make closing remarks, and the order, which has been predetermined through random selection. We will begin with Mr. Brat, followed by Mr. Trammell, and then Mr. Carr. So, Mr. Brat, the floor is yours.
Thank you all very much again for hosting this event and for Benedictine allowing us to use this wonderful facility. I want to reiterate, as an economist, I want to go to Washington to fix the economic problems that we face today as a country and to restore confidence in our values and virtues and the institutions that we've talked about all evening. Obamacare is crushing job creators. It is increasing the cost of your health care. I want to repeal that. President Obama has very clearly said, make no mistake, my policies are on the ballot this term. And they are. If you vote for my opponent, you will be voting for his policies. Make no doubt about that. He says he wants balance, etc., but he is running on the Democratic ticket for a reason. And so if you go to his webpage, you will not find clear answers on any of these issues, on Obamacare, on energy, on the border, on every issue. It's almost like we're in a Seinfeld show about nothing. My opponent's running on nothing, right? And so we have to be very clear and put forward very clearly the issues we're running on. I've done that. I want to repeal Obamacare. I want to secure the border. There's no balance when it comes to securing the border. We need to secure the border. We need to put an end to illegal immigration, which 10 million folks coming across the border to compete, causing national security agencies to question where ISIS is going to come into our country next. And then the fundamental economic realities we've discussed tonight, the debt we're passing on to the next generation. And I addressed the $127 trillion issue 10 months ago with solutions. My opponent has said in the press it's not a problem. So there are stark differences that you've heard tonight. And so as you go to the ballot box, I hope you will weigh them all carefully. I think I've been very forthright in giving you honest answers to everything and sharing my principles I believe in. I'd be honored to have your vote, 2 of them actually on November 4. Sorry. Thank you.
And Mr. Trammell, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you to our organizers and everybody who came out tonight. This is democracy in action. Thank you to my colleagues right here for this dialogue we've been having. And tonight, we've actually been able to hear a lot about those challenges that we face here in the 7th District, not just here in the 7th District, but as Americans. And we've also been able to hear some tangible differences between us. And that's, the three of us are different about these ideas and how we address the problems that Congress is going to face. We also have different personalities and experiences that we bring to the table, and that's all part of what you have to weigh. That's democracy in action. And it harkens back to the days of the Founding Fathers and the conversations that we've always had in this country about the most appropriate role of government and the qualities and characteristics that we expect to see in our elected officials. Many of our problems today are in fact similar to those that the Founding Fathers faced, and they're not insurmountable. We need a representative who's ready to clean up messes that other people have made. We need a representative who is willing to reach across the aisle and work with people who don't always agree with him or think the way that he does. We need a representative who is patient and listens. We need a representative who is in touch with the district and pledges not to take the perks that typically are handed out freely to members of Congress. We need a representative who is able to work for everyone in the district, including seniors, vets, and students. The choice on November 4th is one that asks us to consider pessimism versus optimism, partisanship versus bipartisanship, promises of easy solutions versus open willingness to work hard and engage in active problem solving, do nothing versus do something, sound bites versus sound advice. With your vote for me on November 4th, we can begin the journey forward together from the crossroads of history where we are. I say, let's get going.
And Mr. Carr, we will ask you to wrap things up.
Well, I do want to say thank you. And, it's rare in a political situation where being last is actually an advantage. Right now, we've had such a great evening. This is something that voters need to see more of. Matter of fact, we've had a couple of events, and unfortunately, we haven't been able to have all three of us on the stage. And everybody's aware of the event next week. Now, I've heard, and Mr. Brat has said, he was absolutely not involved in that. And I do believe that he was not involved in the decision that Randolph-Macon made to use a $50,000 campaign contribution threshold to keep all qualified candidates out of the event. What I'm asking right now is that both of you talk to Randolph-Macon and let them know that the voters deserve to hear all three voices. And what we've also seen is that we're able to disagree without being disagreeable. So any idea that Randolph-Macon has that it's going to somehow devolve into chaos with the entrance of a third voice, they need to listen to this. They need to listen to the back and forth of ideas, the constructiveness. I appreciate it, but they're going to cut me off soon. Told you. Now, I'm also going to make a statement, and we talk about principle. These two gentlemen have some excellent ideas. They have some excellent solutions. I'm the only one that can combine those and go up there and change Washington. But what I will say is that on November 4th, when the 7th District does something historic and puts a libertarian in federal office, I'm going to ask both of these two gentlemen to accompany me.
I want to thank all of you again, and whether you agree with these guys or not, you have to understand that it takes a great deal of personal sacrifice to put yourself behind the podium. It's easy to be in the audience. It's not so easy to be up here. So whether you agree or not, these folks deserve your utmost respect for putting themselves out there.
You've just heard James Carr, Jack Trammell, and Dave Brat, candidates for the 7th District congressional seat in